welcome to this episode 176 of Frame and Reference. You're about to drop in on a conversation between me, Kenny McMillan, and my friend Markus Forderer, ASC BBK, DP of September 5. Enjoy. How's the lens website going?
The Cinematographer is good. I mean, I'm busy. I'm in the middle of a film in Australia. I just came back over the holidays to LA. So I'm flying out tomorrow. So don't have much time, but keep publishing stuff. We shot so many tests, so we have banged, I think, another 50 lens sets. It just takes forever to do the post, like to sync it, to tag everything and upload and, post about it. So it's slowly growing, but there's so many, there's some really lens enthusiasts deep diving into and shooting messages. That's quite fun.
Yeah.
And more people discovering it.
I can't remember if we talked about it last time, but how are you getting the repetition? Because I imagine you could just get a motion control device for the lens flare on black, but now especially with that desert scene, is that a rendered scene or what's
that's a composite basically. So we didn't go out to the desert with 600 lens cases. It's that's the only way to keep adding to it and the landscape not changing it. So it's a shot with a clean plate, with a very clean lens. The sun was right in the center, and I blocked it with a flag, and then did a clean plate to paint out the C-stand and the flag. So the original plate has no sun, no flare whatsoever, and then we overlay the motion control material shot on black. But I had a reference lens in a vintage spherical lens and an anamorphic lens, which I also shot in that same scenario to compare later when I overlay. How does the overlay look versus the real vintage lens? And it's pretty close. We found the right setting, and because it's all shot on black with, if you use the right blend mode,
right, soft light or whatever,
opacity 94 or something. It's 90% like the reference lens that we shot. And this way we can add, every other week a new lens is coming out, so we can keep adding it, and you can really compare. But we even map distortion. Not on the old ones, but all the new stuff we're shooting, we map distortion and light fall off. So you see the natural vignetting. So the only thing you cannot judge is image sharpness or chromatic aberration. So it's all about flare, color cast, fall off, and distortion. But for new stuff, we also capture now bokeh plates. That's super complicated. We found something that's also repeatable. But it's something for another special.
Yeah. How do you actually, that does bring up a good question though, is now since, I got to stop playing with this piece of Velcro. Now that you, that's really, you can choose any camera, but usually you're going to be on your Alexa, your Red, your Venice. I feel like lens tests have become more important than ever, especially because you have so many options. In your mind, what goes into a good lens test? How, let's say you're only given a small amount of time in one of these bays, how do you make sure you get the most out of a lens test?
I think it's very subjective. Everybody does it a bit different, and I think I do it quite different. I don't like to shoot charts, and I really do it as if I would shoot a little scene. If bring a person, I don't do not in a test room with a chart and some Christmas lights, because when do you ever have that, right? I want to see
Hallmark
somebody standing by a window, when you're in a rental house and just go somewhere, ask, can I go in your office corridor or something, or just outside, shoot a day exterior, depending what the film is, right? If it's all a lot of night or whatever, or I go in a car in a parking lot just to have some real background, and then I pre-select a couple of lenses I want to compare, right? I think they say everything looks great until somebody shows you something better. It's so subjective. You have to compare 2 or 3 lenses next to each other and then say, this one stands out for that particular project, right? And then we can say, what is it? And now I always, because we have this Cineflash platform, I always run the lenses through that. If we don't have them already in the library, run it through this. Because that's my technical part, because there I can see, it's not a test chart per se, but I can see what's happening. And if the lens is very, sterile and wants to or shows a lot of character. So with that, I pre-select 2-3 lens sets, and then I go to rental house and test specifically, maybe bring candles or and just shoot as close as possible to what a shot could look like. Like you can't test everything, right? But like maybe close up in a medium, somebody standing by a window, and then I take it from there.
Yeah. Well, because I was thinking, like when I was, looking up behind the scenes stuff after I saw the movie, it occurred to me, I was like, this guy probably, because I saw you were using like lenses that I don't think, like I had never even heard of. What were they? Not the zines, the other one.
September 5.
Yeah.
That we use, I detuned a set of DZO picture zooms. These are like,
right.
And then we used Apollo anamorphics.
Those ones.
Yeah.
I'd never even heard of those.
Amazing lenses. They're made in Ukraine, like in Kharkiv, really close to the front line, where close to Russia, and they're still making them. And I saw some early tests, and what's so unique about them, their close focus is insanely good. They're all almost like a macro. Every lens is like a macro lens. And I knew for September 5, we would be in that tight space. It's almost like shooting in a submarine, right? We're with our characters in that control room. And I knew we have to be able to get close and not just stop. Now we need a diopter or swap to a different lens that has a better close focus. I knew that the style we want to film, and Tim Philbaum, the director, he's all about, capturing something authentic in a moment. So we needed gear and lenses and cameras that allowed us to be flexible and react to what's happening on the camera. And then we mixed all kinds of lenses, like, it's the 70s period film, and we talked about it for a long time. Should we shoot the whole thing on film? But then I also didn't want it to look really like a film shot in the 70s. It should like evoke the period, so you feel like, right, you buy into it and you follow the story, you're not distracted. Like sometimes you see a film that's a period film and it looks like, wait a second, somebody shot this yesterday in their backyard, like on a latest, whatever, modern high resolution camera. And so I think you need something to make people forget, right? Like that they're watching a movie and immerse themselves. So we used latest generation 8K red V-Raptor cameras because they're compact and they allow you to shoot this multi-format sensor, right? We could window down to Super 16, Super 35, or large formats. So some scenes, whenever the tension is really high, I switch to anamorphic primes, the Apollos. So we use the full sensor because these are large format anamorphics, and the stretched bokeh, I think, adds to tension in the frame. Like people always they literally focus on when you test the lens on how sharp is it, how does skin look like. But if you're in a movie theater and you have this massive canvas, 80% of the screen is out of focus, right? We focus on the character's eyes. So how that bokeh, how that out of focus area looks, really affects how you feel about, right, the scene and the characters. And for us, it was so important the real events took place over the course of 22 hours. The live broadcast on ADC showing that hostage situation, and we knew we had to compress time into like 90 minutes. And how can we make our audience today watching this, hopefully in the theater, how can we make them feel like how we think the audience back then was glued to their televisions, not knowing. But it was the first time in history that there was a live broadcast of a terrorist event that had never happened before. And like talking to people, I was not around in 72, but talking to people who have witnessed this, they said like this was unimaginable. People were like glued to the screens and like didn't know what's going to happen, right? Any minute something terrible could have happened and you just didn't know. So we had to create tension with every technique, like so the lenses, the camera, the lighting, editing, like with a brilliant editor, Hans-Jörg Weisbrich, and we flooded him with material, like the way Tim Philbaum and I, like we would like to shoot is like specifically for this film, but we wanted to not have any like marks on the ground and light for specific close-up. But in the morning I came in and I tried to I knew, of course, where the action would take place. In that scene, they would probably look at the monitor wall, and the next scene, they will be walking down a corridor. But I tried to relight it all for 360 as much as possible. With everything, I was on a dimmer board, had like amazing lighting crew. So I was operating a camera on this film, but I had a little headset on, so I could quickly give notes in between takes, or during the take, we would fade, dim down lights that would come to flat in a certain angle. And it was quite amazing. So it has this period look, but it's all done with modern technology. Everything like LED lights, then put into old period housings made to look like old fluorescent tubes, but it's all Astera tubes, pixel programmed. So we had individual pixels flicker in the tubes to, take the edge off, right? Sometimes when you see something that's shot on a soundstage, you feel it's too perfect, too controlled. So if you study like old fluorescent tubes, they have some subtle fluctuations, usually towards the ends where they're mounted, right, into the housing. There's a little flicker. So with the Asteras, we could pixel program that. So the ends had a little bit more flicker, the center sometimes some random flicker, and then also some color variation. When we had like a corridor with 100 tubes, long corridor, they all have slight color variations programmed in because they're so perfect out of the box. And then whenever something dramatic happens, there's Peter Sarsgaard's character gets like some piece of important information, and he runs from his office into the control room in panic, and we increase that flicker frequency in those tubes. It's like super subconscious, but it does something. And the same actually in the control room, right? We knew the televisions are the window to the outside world. Like we're in this submarine style. It's like a bunker, right? There was no windows, and the director was always saying no windows. We're gonna do it like in a real location. And I said, oh my god, all I'm doing is I'm bringing light through windows from the outside, and how we're gonna make people aware that time is passing. It's like middle of the night, or it's like the next morning. So
we had those clocks on the walls.
The clock,
you can at least look at those. Yeah,
they're moving. Continuity nightmare. But yeah, so we did it all with lighting programmed in we programmed like a night look and like a brighter day look. And so it's every time we leave the control room, for example, go to another location, come back, the light has changed, always based on the need of the scene. And whenever they go live, right, to feel that tension, like there's a guy, it's almost like a rocket launch. They count down 3, 2, 1, the lights turn off in the background, and then we ramp up the flicker of those TV screens. So the TV screens themselves, we sync to the camera shutter, so they appear not to flicker. But I was so inspired by watching documentaries from the time. There's like this brilliant documentary, One Day in September, which is actually about the Olympics hostage situation. It's like an amazing, intense documentary. And other films from the time when you see in documentaries, you see monitors flickering because they didn't have the technology to sync, like in a motion picture film, right? We have like special people who modify a TV to run at 24 hertz, and we have sync boxes and try to make it as perfect as possible. But then it also almost looks like a comp, like a visual effects comp, right? I mean, when we have this perfect burn, and like I saw it in documentaries, that's what I found so interesting, to see those flickers and the analog artifacts. So we installed a row of LED soft lights, those like sky panels and big snapbacks just above the TV wall, because like most of the time our characters are watching that TV wall and interacting with that. So we pushed soft light into their face that appears to come from the TVs. And there we had pre-programmed different flicker frequencies. So whenever, like in the beginning, we just established that the TVs are flickering, so it's very subtle. When the tension goes higher, we increase the flicker frequency. And that's super effective. Like there's actually scientific studies I found in pre-production where they tested this with mice and later with humans, that if you flicker with between 25 hertz and 40 hertz, you can affect the human's heart rate. There's a sense of heightened alertness going on. And like, I think that's really similar, like what music does when you hear certain beats, right? How it can affect your heart rate. The light flicker in the dark movie theater and you see that screen pulsating, like we don't strobe from black to white, right? You would go crazy, but
You're right.
it's a subtle effect. It's basically the ambience light in the room is strobing, but the monitors themselves are, if you look at it closely, they're not strobing. That's why I think that's why people don't get annoyed by it, because I tested this in pre-production. If they would strobe themselves, you get annoyed by it or you get a headache. But so you know your eye always locks onto the brightest part of the frame, and like a bright monitor in a dark room. You focus on it, but then the ambience light in the room is strobing. But it makes you think it comes from the TV. That was quite effective, especially with the climax of the film.
Yeah, you know what's funny is I thought watching it that it was a location, and then I saw some of those behind the scene photos. I was like, of course it's a set. Like, why wouldn't it be? But I also just assumed that everything was practical. Obviously, I know you use like film lights, but I just assumed they were all in the fixtures or whatever. And then I saw that wall, and I only noticed the flicker, probably because I was like watching it a little critically, so I could ask questions. But like, there's like one very close up of the main. I don't know any of the people's names, but like then I could see it, and I was like, oh, that's like an interesting, because it doesn't feel fake. It does exactly as you're saying. Like it looks like the TV would. I know almost, you and your second, go for it.
Yeah, almost like when you watch it in a movie theater, I feel it almost reminds me of the projector flicker from
exactly
film projector, but it is not a constant flicker. It's like dynamic. So that's what's quite interesting about it.
Yeah, and then I guess you and your wife programmed all of the Astera tubes, in your hotel.
So yeah, there was like the movie was in development for a long time. Like I think 3 years before we started filming, we started scouting in the Olympic Village. Like I went to film school in Munich with the director and some of the producers. So the Olympic Village is like a protected heritage site. It looks, certain areas still look exactly like in the 70s. So we scouted it several times and then talked about how we would film it. But then by the time they got the green light to shoot it, I was on another show. And I had only 2 weeks from wrapping that show to coming to Munich, prep quickly, and then start shooting. So I knew there's not much time. And I know I was so passionate about this film with Tim, like we gotta get this as good as possible. So my wife, who's a dimmer board operator, she was working with me in Berlin at the time at this show. In fact, it was Constellation. I think we didn't talk about this.
Yeah. The last one, yeah.
And so on the weekends, she brought her dimmer board to the hotel room, and we borrowed an Astera tube, and we could, because everything on our set on September 5, everything was Astera tubes or Hydra panels. So it's all the same light engine and pixel mapping. So we could copy paste effects. So we sat down for a couple of weekends and experimented, like what flicker frequency makes you feel like feel uneasy, or gets your adrenaline up, or what frequency do you gonna get a migraine? Like at some point it becomes and if you flicker too fast, the effect disappears. It looks like it's not flickering at all. And then we programmed preset certain colors, like we created a dirty fluorescent, a green fluorescent, like a warm fluorescent. Like this is all things that's so subjective. Yes, you can match to existing lights, but because we didn't have any real fluorescent tubes to match to, we could create it what I felt like with our cameras and lenses looks good. So we preset all of that, and then I went to Munich, and my wife she stayed on that show. They were still filming other episodes when my episodes were wrapped. And then our local crew with my gaffer, Uwe Greiner, and his board operator, Matthias, we loaded the files on their board, and then we could quickly pre-light, which is amazing because they had already rigged everything. So all the hallways and office spaces had all the tubes built in, and then we could just walk through the sets and like, okay, that room, let's make this green fluorescent. That room has a subtle flicker as a base. You barely can catch up with it. And then when we were filming, again, it was super fast. Like on a headset, we had to be so fast. I think we had only 27 days on soundstage and a couple of days on location on the Olympic Village. So we like shot a scene, and then I could quickly say, okay, we turn around to, like cut those in half, make those we had a night fluorescent look because there was no windows. I wanted to create a sense for like magic hour, even if there's no windows, but at least to feel a sense for time passing. And that worked amazing. Like they did an amazing job, like pre-rigging all of that. And everything had to have an effect or animation. Like, they're watching a film on a steam bag, like an editing table, and there we needed again a flicker that had to feel different from a monitor flickering. So we also educate like maybe younger audience who didn't grow up with that technology to understand that's not a TV, that's actually film that ramps up, right? And those fun exercise.
Yeah, well, it's specifically one thing I noticed kind of in when the movie had just started, so I had noticed it, and then it really sucks you in. So I kind of stopped taking notes about halfway through, because it really is like very tense in an amazing way. But I noticed there was a kind of, it's interesting you say in education, because I think that's what it is there is a tech focus in it, where you're seeing all these Kodak and Fuji labeled, like it kind of is like a quick demo, and like, all right, so this, showing the thing going in slow-mo, like how they did that, how they would do title comps and stuff like that, and like kind of explaining to the audience, like, because it's the film definitely makes you think about how media is created, how it's consumed. That quote from Jurassic Park kept popping into my head of like, they were so concerned about whether they didn't think if they should,
Oh, exactly.
But it is it's interesting. We just had an attack here in New Orleans yesterday, and I just saw the movie, and it was really interesting to me to have that in the back of my head while people are tweeting and Reddit and all these everyone's trying to be first. And it's the same thing over and over, like some piece of information gets out there, it's incorrect, they walk it back, there's too much speculation. Like it's fascinating what we haven't learned in 50 years.
I think that makes September 5 so relevant, right? Like going back, September 5, 72 was the first time a terrorist event was broadcast live on television. Before that, there was like, you would read it in the newspaper, or after the fact, somebody would report something, right? This was life, and the responsibility, and like you mentioned, today we are so desensitized, right? And it's almost like a form of entertainment, which is like absurd, right? Like there's real people's lives lost or affected, and it's all the competition today, right? With so many TV channels and the competition with like online media and social media influencers. It's gotten so extreme. That's why I think it's interesting to look back at how that started, and also, like you mentioned, the technology behind it that also informs what they show. How like today we all walk around literally like with a TV and a camera in our pocket, right? Our phone. We can live stream, like go on social media, live share material, take pictures, or watch stuff instantaneously. But back then, by seeing the process they went through, right? Shooting something on 60 millimeter film, they had a runner who smuggled the film through bypassing the police blockade. They had a lab literally on site to quickly develop. Within 20 minutes, they could develop a 60 millimeter. And then they put it in telecine. There was no film scanner, no computers, right? No hard drives. They either did live telecine, or they put stuff on tape, or they, like you mentioned, the guy who does slow motion by hand, right? That's how it started. There's no computers. Somebody by hand slowed down the tape as they play back. It's so interesting. And Tim did deep research with his writer, Morris Binder, and Tim was I think it was so important to him to also educate the audience about how that all happened, right? Like that's when we had the real Jeff Mason, who's played by John Magaro, like the lead character. He was consulting on the project, so he's retired now, but he had this amazing career in television, and he told us about like how fast everything happened, how busy they were just catching up and getting footage out. They never had the time or took the time to ask themselves, should we show this? Or what if we, right, what happens if, can we show this on live television? So all these processes that went into it, and they were so innovative, right? And the technology back then, like today, it looks antiquated, but from every time an Olympics is broadcast or captured, they're using the most cutting edge technology. So what they used in 72, it was the most modern equipment. They had a live satellite. It was one single satellite, right, which the TV stations had to share and schedule time. And they had for the first time a mobile camera. Before that, the cameras were these monsters on a heavy tripod. They could never leave the soundstage, but they had this mobile unit, like we see it in the film at some point, or somebody, it's almost like a Sony Rialto system, like there's a camera, full-size camera, then there's a massive cord to an assistant who has a massive backpack, and then they have another cord that goes out to the station so they could move around.
Yeah, it reminds me, I interviewed, because like one thought that came up while watching the film was just like, man, imagine if they just, all their cameras had SD cards. How much easier this all would have been. But I was reminded of, I interviewed Kristen Johnson, who she made this documentary about her father called Dick Johnson is Dead. He's not dead. But that's the name of the film. And I didn't know this about her, but she was telling me that like when the 5D came out, it was a huge deal because she was a war correspondent, and having the 5D, like the Taliban wouldn't think she was filming. Whereas if you had the video camera, they knew that, and so they would treat it differently. But photography, they were chill with. So she'd be filming on the 5D and able to get in there and like operate, with kind of clandestinely. And I was like, it's just so crazy to again watch how the technology changed and how things that we as filmmakers were like, ooh, large format. For her, it was like, they won't kill me.
That's that. There's a fun scene in September 5, right, when they in the middle of the night,
when they catch him.
They hear those shots in the middle of the night, and the crew is not there yet. So they realize we have to report about it. There's no crew, and then there's only this camera assistant. And Peter Sarsgaard's character is like, "Hey, you, like, can you hold a camera? Yeah. Do you know how to load film? Yeah. Like, there's the cameraman. Like, it's not about art or expression or something. Can you literally push the button? You get the job, right?" And that's what they did. They put a camera there and took a picture of it, and then the people for years after asked themselves, right, like what impact that had. Like there's this iconic image of that masked man on a balcony, which went on like the cover of several newspapers and magazines, and like this iconic, it's like almost like in a horror film when we see this guy coming out fully masked, and it's like that was like chilling to recreate this. So we decided, out of respect for the victims, we didn't want to show any of the hostages or terrorists. So we recreated all those archival pieces. There's some original stock footage, archival footage, everything that shows Jim McKay, the ABC host. Right. That's the original Jim McKay, and some wide shots, but the majority we actually recreated because, like I mentioned, the Olympic Village still exists, and we had like all these references, so we tried to recreate it as accurately as possible. But even like the opening sequence, you see that swim race with Mark Spitz winning, just the whole thing we recreated because the Olympic pool is still around. If you shoot it in one direction and be careful how you frame it, it's exactly like the 70s. If you tilt a bit up, suddenly you're in 2024. And because it's quite difficult to get footage from the Olympics, like the right situation's very complicated, like who has the rights to what, and then also we knew we had to compress time, right? The real events took place over 22 hours. We had to compress time, so we sometimes a scene played out over hours on live TV. Something happened, and something an hour later happened. So we had to compress those moments. So that's why we recreated it. It's still all based on the actual events, but just made it possible to watch it in 91 minutes. And I think we the shortest film in this whole season, right? Everybody's like doing this 3.5 hour epos, and I love watching a movie that's, I think 90 minutes is a great time, right?
It's perfect. I literally, when I saw the the ticket, I was like 148. Yes, let's go. Like happy because the last like 4 movies I've seen, all like 2:30, 3 hours, which is fun sometimes, but I remember they gave Zack Snyder a bunch of shit for releasing that like 4-hour Justice League movie. Yeah. And they're like, this is crazy. Who would watch this? It's like, oh, you're doing it all the time.
Yeah. Well, it sometimes becomes an event thing, right? Like,
you hope.
I hear it now about The Brutalist, right? At an intermission and showing a film.
I think we should have more intermissions.
Yeah. That's actually,
if we're going to do a 3-hour movie, let me go so I don't have to miss something. Let me hit the bathroom, refill the soda. Like that's a good, bring that back.
I totally agree. But it's interesting with, especially for a cinematographer standpoint, sometimes you feel, you shoot all these amazing shots and then after the edit, like, they kill your darlings or they tighten stuff. There's this amazing sweeping shot and it's gone. But on September 5, I really feel like our editor, Hans, your vice president, did a fantastic job. Like I feel like everything is there, but it's super tight. You see somebody storming down the hallway. Bam, you cut to the insert in the next room. Like you don't waste the time to, go like all this shoe leather, getting from A to B. I think that's the moment we hear those shots being fired in the Olympic Village. Like the tension goes up, and it has such a high-paced speed that I think that's so amazing about the film, that similar like our characters, that you have no time to think like, oh my God, what's happening next? What's happening next? And when you walk out of the hopefully theater, like it's interesting for people, hard to, people don't remember, like, did I see this for real or did it happen on a monitor? Because actually, most of it, our characters observe on a monitor. So we shot what's on a monitor too, but it becomes, even if it's like low res, standard def, pixelated, flickering stuff, it's somehow, we go close and zoom in. I think you forget about it. And that always tells me something that, right, they say nothing is as strong as our imagination. Like showing the super crisp and sharp does not make like a terrorist on a balcony more scary. It's the opposite, like seeing it out of focus and you can barely see what's happening when we fill in our blanks, right? It's
lack of information is scarier than knowing, right? Knowing is the antidote to fear.
Totally, right. And
spiders are scary.
Maybe you bring your own fear into it, like, because it's so subjective. Everybody can fill in the blanks with their own imagination.
Yeah. What was crazy actually is we leave the theater, everyone's feeling pretty contemplative, and there was this old German couple with I'm going to assume it was their grandson. Otherwise, good job for them. But they were telling him like, this is what it was like back then. And he had no idea. And the thing that was crazy to me is I had no idea. My sister asked our parents, like, do you remember this? They're like, oh yeah, it was a huge deal. Like it was like one of the biggest things to ever happen. We're like, no one told us.
Oh, yeah.
Like, how does that, and to be perfectly honest, I've met kids who don't know about 9/11, were born in like 2005 and just don't know. I'm like, how do you not know? That was pretty recent. But I guess, I don't know. I don't know what's happening in schools, but yeah, it's like important events seem to only exist with the people that live through them. And then the second they're gone, it's like, never happened.
New generation, they have the new experiences, right? Like, but I know it sounds shocking, but also maybe we sound like old man,
I always do. Every podcast, I'm an old man screaming at clouds.
But it's I think it's fascinating. Like I wasn't around in 72, but I talked to people who watched that live. But I drew too from my experience watching 9/11 live on TV, right? Unfolding how the entire day I was glued to the TV because we didn't know, is it still going on? Is there more going to happen? What is going on? And I think that's what people went through in 72, but they had no reference whatsoever, right? Before the TV landscape was so different, like it was so innocent, to confront people live with something like this. I think that's why it made such an impact. And the film mentioned it at the end, but like more people saw that than Armstrong walking on the moon. It was like unimaginable, right? Like, and it tells you something about human nature too. Like, wait, we shot a freaking first man on the moon, but how we're interested in seeing tragedy and, like that whole new cycle of it's like a voyeuristic part of human nature, maybe that's satisfied there. And I think there's no easy answer for it. Like everybody has to decide for themselves. But can just say for me as a filmmaker and literally a cameraman, right? Like on big movies, I work with operators, but on this one, I was operating a camera because it was so intuitive and, like I mentioned, tight spaces. My longtime camera operator, Stefan Sosna, was my B-cam operator, so we're a great tag team. But standing there in a moment, literally in Munich, realizing this is exactly what had happened like 50 years ago, the responsibility you feel, what you show, what you don't show. And you know how it is, like there's something spooky. There's a masked man on a balcony, and I zoom in and we do flickering light and heightened attention. It's like filmed like a horror film. Like but it's obviously fabricated, right? This is objectively speaking. There's a human in a mask. We're scared of him, but because obviously we anticipate bad things to happen. But these are all filmmaking techniques we use, right, to, I don't want to say manipulate, but to shape and craft the scene so hopefully people feel, and we do it justice. But usually we're doing like fictional stuff. Like this has got me thinking. Even like today I'm on a movie, a completely different movie now, but like you just feel the responsibility of what will people take out of it, right? It's not just all fun and popcorn and entertainment, right? Like people really, some films affect how people think about other people.
Yeah. It must feel weird to go from like, what was it, Red Notice? Yeah, like Red Notice to Constellation to this. It's kind of like that. The definition of popcorn. Well, not necessarily, but Red Notice for sure. Like popcorn fun, a little bit different, and then reality essentially. And I think actually I did want to know about reshooting all of that. Actually, I guess it's kind of like a two-part question. The first being reshooting all of the what do you call it? Archival.
Yeah.
Because I didn't realize, especially because you have those real shots of what was it, Peter Jennings or whoever?
Jim McKay.
Jim McKay,
yeah.
Those blend so seamlessly that I just assumed, they must have licensed all this from a very forgiving ABC. But that plus, I wanted to go back and talk about the reasoning behind using all those lenses. And you said building tension with the anamorphic was one, but like it did look like you had 4 different lens sets on there.
I mean,
and you shot 16, right, for some of the archival?
Yeah, some of the archival footage, because we had the references of the material that was shot. Some was shot on that analog live camera, but a lot was shot on 16 and then shown on telecine back from tape. And so for a long time we discussed, should we shoot the whole thing on film and right for that 70s period, but also knowing how we wanted to film this, and knowing Tim Beilbaum, who likes to shoot really long takes, every scene, we didn't break it up into individual coverage where you say, let's cut and set up a wide shot, cut, remark the actor's position for close-up, change the lighting. We never did this. We shot the whole thing as a oneer with 2 cameras, and we always told ourselves, like on the rehearsal, like we shot a rehearsal, obviously.
Where's my rehearsal cat?
Yeah, you get the badge, the Larry Fong badge.
Yeah, Larry gave me a couple.
Also, so we told ourselves we have only this one attempt to tell that story and get all the beats, almost like in a documentary, right? Like what they went through. So we shot wide shot, a zoom in, walk with John McGarrow's character walking up to a microphone, zoom in, grab the insert, whip pan to somebody coming into the control room door. And because we were 2 cameras, we could always edit it, and tighten it up. We always positioned ourselves in a good way. And then we did 2 or 3 takes. And then when like Tim felt like, we got it, we have the scene captured. And when we were good in time, he like looked at this watch and was like, okay, we still have like 4 minutes. Let's do one more wild style. He called it wild style, where he told the actors, you guys can do whatever you want. If you feel like in the middle of the scene, you want to run out on the hallway or go outside and smoke a cigarette in the middle of the scene, go for it. And the camera, we would not know what they're doing. We would just follow them, whatever they did. And sometimes something really magical would happen, but sometimes also fabricated chaos. And that's what it was all about.
Right.
Because the real Jeffrey Mason, he told us like back then they were so overwhelmed. It was so fast and chaotic at some point, right? Like alone the stress of doing live television, but then doing live they were not journalists, news journalists. They were like sports casters, right? Like
it'd be like if ESPN got handed this out of nowhere and you just got like Shaq on TNT NBA going,
And yes, they
Well,
were right there, right? But they were not trained to also the political context and how, how do we name, what are these people? How should we call these people on TV? That whole phrase of terrorists or terrorism, that was not a thing back then.
Mhm.
This is, going back to this, so we discussed shooting the whole thing on film, and we said like, no, we want to do this long takes and also want to use the TV monitors as like a key light source. I want to feel, they're glued to the screens. You have to feel the light coming from those screens, and all our actors are wearing glasses on purpose so you can see the reflection of what they're looking at. So we tested film, but then decided to shoot digital and Red V Raptor for the majority. But then I felt like we have to counter this with something that's from the time. And then when I researched lenses, and actually there's a special edition of the American Cinematographer magazine talking about the Olympics 72, because it was such a technological milestone. It's the entire special edition. The whole magazine is about the Olympics. And because they had invited directors from all over the world to shoot special documentaries, like artistic films during the time. And so they talk all about who they bring in, what DPs and what cameras they use, but nobody back in the day mentioned lenses. Today all we talk about is like, oh, I'm using that vintage lens, or I detuned that. Have you heard of that new? And
that's rich coming from you, buddy.
Yeah. But back in the 70s, no, they took lenses for granted. It was like something was stuck to the camera. There was maybe, 3-4 options. So they didn't pay much attention to it. It's my take. I don't know. I wasn't around, but
I mean, do you remember those RE16s with just the turret lenses? I doubt anyone swapped those out.
Yeah.
It's just what he had. Yeah.
With the camera, right?
8, 16, and a 5 or something. I can't remember what I had back then.
And so actually going through that magazine, then I saw the ads, and that was the best clue. I could see what was the latest lenses advertised at the time, because knowing the Olympics would use the most cutting edge technology, that is what they used. And I found that lens. It's called a Zoom R. It's the first zoom lens ever made for 35mm stills photography. And it's the first ever, and it looks stunning. You can still find it today. I bought 2 copies of eBay, the collector's items, and we had them PL mounted and modified so we could shoot with them. And it's fascinating to hold that these lenses were even made in Munich. The company made them in Munich. So like, this is a sign, we have to use those. And they were, because the Zoomar made a lot of range of zoom lenses, really long ones. So the Olympics a lot of that stuff was shot on Zoomar lenses for like track, like far long distance stuff. But we knew we're gonna be up close in the control room, so none of those old lenses would focus close or be wide enough. So we used that Zoomar lens that was designed for stills photography and made it work for film.
Yeah, talk to me about self-modifying that DZO zoom. How'd you pull that off?
I can only say, don't try this at home.
Yeah.
So actually with that Cineflares lens database I started, right, which became like a passion project for years. I keep every time in between projects, or I keep testing lenses, right? We tested 100 sets of lenses. I think currently we have like 85 lenses online shared, but we tested over 100 lens sets already. So it's a couple hundred individual focal lengths. And sometimes, because it's all shot as motion control, I discover like, wow, look at that. What is it? So maybe 28mm Olympus made for stills photography. When you shoot a T4 and put a light source at the edge of frame, something super magical happens that really reminds you on a certain period, like this feels like the 70s. So I tested all these things, and I tested all zoom lenses, but I knew also we have to shoot handheld and we have to shoot fast. These old zooms from the 70s, besides that still zoom I mentioned, they're all pretty big and heavy, or that the close focus not good. So I decided to actually buy a set of those picture zooms. They're fairly affordable, and I knew I wanted to just experiment and take them apart because what I learned from that Cineflares database, I saw certain effects happening in certain lens groups, and I'm not a lens designer or lens like optical engineer at all, but I know what I like and respond to. and I had a feeling where this must happen, in which is it happening in front of the iris, behind the iris, and stuff like that. So I took those zooms apart. It was 2 zooms, and I did all kinds of stuff. Like I did with a thin layer of dust between, those air gaps, and then cleaned it off with gentle air pressure off the center. So the center is kind of pristine. Towards the edges, there's a bit of dust, some fine dust. Between some, there's brought it like lint. So because I like this, if you have a real old lens, and you stop them down a bit, you see the dust particles in between, and it adds a little diffusion halation effect, and it's so random versus using a filter in front, in a matte box, which is like a 2-dimensional effect. Right. So we spread that out over several lens groups. I put fingerprints, like literally in certain parts of the frame. I knew, for example, we have those hanging lights in the control room, always above the frame, and I knew there would be a lot of bright lights there. So I put fingerprints towards the top of the frame over 3 or 4 lens surfaces throughout the zoom, so that when you pan into this lens, there's like almost a 3-dimensional halation happening. It's not just a front filter. So that all sounds very fun and great until I had to put them back together. Yeah. It was quite easy to take them apart, but it took me maybe 20 minutes to disassemble them, and then I experimented with different dust and stuff, put them roughly back together, put it on camera, looked at it. But then when I wanted to perfectly assemble it and make sure all the mechanics work, everything was stuck. Nothing would work. Even it was a puzzle to put it together. So it took me the entire day, and I finished and said, okay, it's back together. It's like a puzzle, but dang, nothing would move anymore. Everything was stuck. Right. And I was like, I need some help. And I went to Airy Rental, was our camera rental. They organized all the camera package and stuff. Like, hey, Manfred, he's a lens genius. Can you help me with the thing? I messed with it too deep. And he's like, oh, yeah, give it to me. And in 15 minutes, he came back and the thing looked like brand new. Like the mechanics, like all the modification was still in there, but the mechanics were butter smooth. I don't know how they do it.
They probably just cleaned out some of the dust you put in the
that's all I haven't told them, don't touch anything. But and it's the lens probably they've never touched before either. Like it's amazing how you cannot, and there's no easy blueprints, and they're all a bit different. Boom. And then it was brilliant. But ever since I never touched that lens again. It's like a one-off. I don't want to open it or clean it. I just leave it like that.
Yeah, you should have someone like etch your name into it or something, so that it like real nice, so it looks like factory.
Yeah. I'll see if I ever shoot on this again. But
so in the control room, it was mostly those DZO zooms and then the Apollo anamorphic. Were there other primes?
Yeah, we used for inserts, and that's like a Killfit Macro Keelar. It's like a 90 millimeter. It's also made in Munich. It's a 90 millimeter macro lens. I think it was one of the first macro lenses that looks stunning. It also covers full frame, large format. So use that for really tight inserts. The Zoom R, I had a couple also special old photo zooms I put, which we couldn't PL mount them, so I only used them for special inserts. Or whenever we recreated archival footage, I would manually focus anyways. We don't need to, put gearings on and make sure it works properly. I used sometimes some old still zooms, which I collected over the years, and I knew they have that feel. It's hard to say what it is, right? But if you start with a too clean lens, you can try whatever you want with color grading and film emulation. But if the lens is too contrasty and too sterile, I think it's like baked into the image.
Yeah. Well, it's you had mentioned that you went to college with the director.
Yeah.
And looking at some of those behind the scenes photos, just seeing you guys holding those V Raptors, like very clean builds, like locket box, monitor, that's it. And it looks like a student film, not the final product, but like just the creation of it. Like just, you got your little camera, you're just, filming.
Yeah, we stripped it down. I'm obsessed with it. You know how it is on big films. Sometimes the camera builds road.
Turns into a tank. Plastic. Yeah.
And if you don't look, if you turn around, suddenly there's cup holders installed, like everything in 5 minutes. Yeah. And so there we were, like, I had amazing first ACs, like Oliver Schill and Ken McDonald. They both focus wizards. Like the way we shot, like very few people can pull that off, like no marks, no rehearsals. And you also, there's such a creative choice, right? To, in that moment, to decide now, do you say shallow on somebody or you go focus deep on a monitor looking at, they were really massively important to make this work. And so in pre-production, we built those packages as small as possible because I knew we wanted small and light means speed, right? And flexibility. And so we don't have to rebuild the rig for some other special thing. I knew if you build it like that, that we can do everything. Because we didn't do dollies or anything. There's like one slider shot and then I think 2 Steadicam shots in the hallway. Everything else is handheld, sometimes handheld on a rickshaw or very grounded. Yeah, but I think it's so important. Like when I operate myself, right, you want to become one with the camera. And I'm not a person. I didn't grow up with looking through a viewfinder. I'm like, maybe I'm a digital kid. And I'm fairly tall. So most actors are a bit shorter. So if I would put a camera on my shoulder, looking through a viewfinder, I would look down at them. Right. And I want to be, eye level or maybe lower and make the world look impressive with them. So I hold it in front of my body. I need a monitor on top. Also, like when I'm lighting and framing, I like to see the space in 3D with my eyes looking past the monitor. Like when you're looking through a viewfinder, yes, you're immersed into the moment, but maybe I'm not. I missed something where I could react. I could take half a step to the left and react to this and frame out that.
You have a better awareness.
Yeah. And also seeing like what's happening with the light, like, oh yeah, there's something up there. I can like turn to the other side. And but it's so subjective. Everybody works different, and you just have to build the camera the way you feel is right for you. And today, all these cameras are so great, right? Like it doesn't matter. You shoot on a Red camera, an Alexa, Sony. If you feel at home with a certain system, you know it in and out. It's just a tool. If you know how to expose, and like back then, most of the references we looked at was documentaries. They shot on like reversal film, and like they had like, I don't know, maybe 8 stops latitude or something. Like we're so luxurious. We could shoot 1600 ASA in dark corridors, and it was creatively so liberating. It was super tough because it was such a tight space, and we had to be so creative because otherwise, when I read the script, I thought, and like Tim showed it to me, like, what do you think? You think is the film going to be, are we doing justice to these events by staying so focused on the perspective of that ABC crew? And how can we give this scope or the illusion of scope? It's like, I mean, you're a magician, you know how it works. It only matters what's in the frame, but if you indicate that the world is bigger than what's in the frame, it will feel bigger. Like, we see those helicopters approaching. It's also something we recreated with a miniature helicopter.
Yeah, they're little drones, right?
it's like an RC helicopter. We found this amazing pilot. He built this over the course of 10 years, and his hobby. And it happened to be this exact model with the right lettering of this German border police helicopter from the 70s. And we could film, we tried to get a permit can we fly a real helicopter through the Olympic Village, and we would not get any permission. Not even the German chancellor was ever allowed to go there with a helicopter for a ceremony or something. And we discussed doing a visual effects, but then everything in our film is so grounded and tactile and feels real. We tried to capture all this stuff in camera. That's why we used miniatures for the helicopter, and we used a simple trick there to give it scale. Like the helicopter appears to fly behind the TV towers, and that gives it scale. In fact, it flies in front of it because it's so small. And then we used a simple split screen that makes it appear like it goes behind the TV tower, so it must be big.
Right.
And then towards the end, that whole showdown, there's a shootout happening at the airport, and the whole story was that our characters go there to film it, take a picture of it, but they didn't quite see what was happening. It's all based on the true facts. People were stuck on a fence, and the police would prevent them from going too close to the airport. So they didn't quite see the outcome. That's why that whole reporting happened, that they thought at some point everybody is released. It's like a happy ending. So we scouted the original airport where that happened, and it's not period accurate anymore. The whole surrounding changed. There's like a BMW test track around, like they try testing new cars, like sensors and stuff. So there too discussed how we make it like in production meetings, you always discuss how do we tackle this problem. And I feel like these days everybody's like just pointing at the visual effects supervisor, like you just make it, you guys build it, right? But then knowing again how Tim likes to shoot, and like we're coming from this documentary style, we're not gonna just frame for nicely wide shot and leave a space to comp in an airport. We want to shoot through a fence, rec focus, have like extras crossing, smoke and stuff, and zooming in. Crash zoom, this is stuff you would never want to do on a VFX shot because it would be impossible to track or comp. They would tell you shoot it more safe and then we'll add all that stuff later, but it would never have that energy. So I said the whole story is about that they can barely see what's happening at the airport, and we shoot it through fence with smoke and shaky and dark. I said, let's do it as a miniature, very simple. And I think nobody believed me this would work. So I tested, I did with an intern, a PA at the production office. We had test scout pictures from the real airport. I printed it with the office printer and put it on a parking lot at night. And I just lit it with one LED tube and showed them how that looks like. And this was like a proof of concept. And okay, let's move forward with this. And there's production designer, they did a great job. They then photoshopped based on real pictures of the airport, made sure it like changed everything that was not period accurate. So it's pretty much like a cutout miniature where we backlit the windows with a couple LED tubes with some practical smoke, and then with visual effects they comped in to scale some of the muzzle flash fire and the sound effects. And that way, I think again, it's like in a magician's trick, right? You don't want to quite see it, but you feel that it's there, or you believe. You probably go out of the theater and you think you could swear I've seen it, but you didn't really see it. You in your imagination you've seen it, right? They always say, right? We think we see with our eyes, but we see with our brain. Our eyes are stocking in so much information that does not make any sense, and our brain tries to make sense out of it, and we believe we see what we know, what we think we know, and what we think we see.
Yeah, I did want to know about. First of all, I didn't know it was a cutout. Watching the, I thought you had a real building out there. But I did want to know about the look of the film, because I think it does lean vintage, I suppose, but it is its own unique thing. And what I really loved was the kind of cool steel blue versus tungsten look to it. But it's not like aggressive, it's all very kind of muted. And I was wondering kind of like what you were aiming for there. Were you just shooting the camera at like 4,300 the whole time so you could get that balance, or were they color temperature, or were they like color?
Color temperature. So everything was LED. So we programmed those colors to look right in camera. So we created one simple show LUT for the whole thing that used some film emulation as a base, but then it's all done with lighting to get this balance right. Like you mentioned, like most films I've seen from the 70s, they were all shot with tungsten lighting. They're usually very warm, or the blacks are warm, monochromatic. And I always knew, like, that's why I don't want to recreate something that looks like it's shot actually in the 70s. It should evoke the feel of the period, but also feel more present. And because back then when they were walking those corridors and looking at these events happening, this was real time for them, right? This was the most cutting edge technology that felt modern. And so I wanted to find this hybrid that feels familiar with the period, but also has something modern. And I think the more contemporary approach of lighting with LEDs and cooler light that comes from the screens. And then we used very high ISO, like 1600 ISO, to boost the light coming from the TVs that added already a certain grain to the image. Like we did, there's some additional grain added, but if you look at the dailies, like what we saw on set and what went to the edit until the final film, it's very close to how we shot it and exposed it. And it was so important to have that show LUT dialed in that you can really make those choices quickly, right? You say like, wow, this is too dark, or we we get away with it, and or we let's especially knowing I wanted to make sure all these scenes feel different and it does have a richness, right? That came from color. Like, how do we make sure that it doesn't feel literally monochromatic? That we spend so much time in the same location that hopefully when you go out of the theater, you forget about it. That we spend maybe 80% in the control room, and it's all done with lighting. We constantly change the lighting mid-scene. You know, when they have this countdown and they're going live on air, it's almost like a rocket launch. There's somebody saying 3, 2, 1. Certain lights turn off in the background. Then the TV studio, which that was the only one, the real TV studio within our film studio, where Jim McKay was technically giving his live broadcast. We had a double of Jim McKay, which we used to introduce that he's there. He would walk in and out in wide shots, and this was all lit with real tungsten light. And I actually have to say I haven't used tungsten light in forever. You know, there's some people who swear on it. All they use is tungsten light in today, and I'm the opposite. Like the moment LEDs came up, and I thought, like, even in the early days when the color wasn't perfect yet, I was like, I don't care, we'll make this work, because the advantage is to be able to modify on the fly and improve from take to take without gelling and stuff is so big that, and now the color is so good on LEDs, but we had to use really old tungsten Fresnel lights that are on camera. Like we see them as like a set part of the set dressing, but they also had to light the scene and affected how the whole thing looked like. That was a fun experience.
Yeah, I mean, I saw actually, I guess you see it in the movie, but yeah, like the zip lights and stuff. I remember when I've told the story before, but when I was much younger, I was shooting a medical instructional video. I guess you'd call it an industrial. And the head gaffer there on the set that this medical company had was tungsten only, right? I was like, I've got Kino LEDs in my trunk right now we can use. Or maybe it was the bulbs at the time, but he was like, no, we're tungsten all the time. But I did remember seeing a zip light in person and going, oh, I've made it. Because, in film school, they were like, these are the best soft lights you can get.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're better now.
It's interesting. The same way when I used, I think, Kino flows for the first time. I was like, wow, these are like, that's what the pros use, right? In my early days. And I mean, it was such a unique soft light source. And now I feel like with LED technology, they come in all different kinds, size and shapes, but it's, they still all have the individual quality, right? Like what an Astera tube does versus like a sky panel. And it's not just, sometimes you think it's just copy paste, you put the same color values on and it will feel the same. It's still, of course, it's the size and shape and how hard it feels, how soft. And yeah, for us, the tricky part was really using the monitor as a light source, or the Steenbeck editing machine in the dark, to feel like the light is really coming from that machine. We did all kinds of tricks. Like we used my iPad in the background. Like we had this editing room where we had the hero Steenbeck, and then in the background there was a second editing bay, and Marianne, the translator, played by Leonie Banish, she was like translating something, and there needed to be something on that screen, but we didn't have any film to put in to play back, and they said, let's just make it glow it white and kind of burn in something with real sex. And then Tim and I said, like, no, let's figure something out to get this in camera. And I had my iPad, which I always use as a director's viewfinder, with a viewfinder app, and I had the dailies on. We just had shot a couple of days prior at the Olympic Village. We shot some of those archival pieces, like some people talking in the camera, hey, we're here at the Olympic Village. That stuff she would watch on her editing machine. And I saw like this iPad fits, like 4x3, fits perfectly into the Steenbeck, the ground glass where the project, it fits back in there. I didn't even have to tape it. It was just made for it. I was like, we got to just do this now and play back the dailies. I'd like the dailies from the, the dailies system. We didn't use pics, it was a different system. So just could play that back without any prep. I could just improvise it on the day, but it's out of focus and it's there. And then again, it's not just that it saves you money because you say it's a bit effect shot, but it also, you can judge this guy had like a blue sweater on, like you judge the lighting and it reflects into the room. And I also could make sure it's the right brightness so it feels real. Like sometimes, we're there on set as cinematographers, but then in post-production, months later, somebody will do a visual effects comp and then they decide how bright is that monitor. And usually they play too safe, maybe not understanding the exposure values. When you're in a dark room, a monitor is like almost blown out like a bright window on a sunny day, right? And you need that to feel right. And also, again, like for us, it was always about not showing, but indicating. And we don't want to perfectly show it. It's like the audience is supposed to fill in the gaps. So we played always with the contrast ratio.
Well, and did you guys kind of play with the black point at all? Were you kind of like, because it feels very crushed, but not in like a bad way, but just like, was that in an attempt to kind of emulate a high ISO film kind of thing? Because it's not like, a lot of movies now you can see deep into the black point,
Yeah. I always was inspired by, there was a technique when you shoot on film, you can flash the blacks, where basically to heighten the sensitivity of your negative, right? You pre-expose it to very low light level, which then technically makes the film a bit more sensitive in the blacks, but it also makes the blacks milky. So it's like almost like an optical illusion. You think you see more into the blacks by lifting the whole blacks up. And so this was something I was after, because I found like if you show really deep blacks hitting zero value, right, it feels way too modern. And people people talk always about, hey, how does film look like? And everybody has a different imagination or memory. Do you really want to see how film looks like for real, like today in 2024, how it would look like if you expose it, bring it to a lab, scan it back in? Or is it more like a romantic memory of how film looks like? And people always think film has these amazing colors and deep blacks, but if you project film, because you have light, like xenon light, going through this 35 millimeter film, and even if you have a deep black, there's some light coming through that black that lifts the blacks literally on a projector. And today, with like digital projection on monitors and like laser projectors, right, we can achieve a way deeper black, even deeper black than film could do. And that's sometimes, I think, not necessarily, and it doesn't make the image better. It can be, right? You can use it maybe to see more detail in the black, but we used it to rather create silhouettes, like where you still see into the darkness, but it's actually like crushed, compressed black. But it's all done the way we exposed it. It was fairly dark, and we had this lookup table created that prevented our blacks to go to zero. And like, I have to give a shout out to Florian Utzi Martin, who's like my colorist, and he's also based in Munich. And he has such a great sensibility. Like whenever I can, we work together in creating a show lot for a specific project, and be really inventive and not just use something we used in the past, but say, what's September 5? It's a 70s film. If you have the luxury to create your own personal film stock, right? You don't have to just choose Fuji or Kodak or whatever, Arri or Sony or Alexa. Like you can make your own film stock, and there's so much testing involved, obviously, and that's what I like, to make one thing that fits it all. Like it's almost impossible, right? How can you make something that works for day, night, exterior, interior, low light, high contrast? But if you shoot enough test sequences and dial it all in, it's like if you shoot on Kodak film and you expose it properly, you don't need 5 different film stocks for different looks, right? Sometimes I see people using 12 different LUTs, lookup tables, one for magic hour, one for that flashback. Like, why not find one thing that glues everything together, and then you can play with lighting and production design, color choices, costumes, but there's something that all glues it together and makes it feel like, oh yeah, this is September 5, right? I always like films that can pull this off. Like if you see a shot from The Matrix, immediately that's The Matrix. You cannot cut a close-up of, and not just because it's Keanu Reeves, right? You cannot cut this and mix it into another film. It will immediately, it has its own DNA. And I like films that pull that off, that have something unique in every frame, or how light behaves within that frame.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine having the majority of the film take place in one location probably helps, it doesn't overcomplicate the LUT needs.
Totally. But we also had to, sometimes it helps if you have real locations, real daylight, something to ground it, like because we shot pretty much everything on a soundstage, everything was lit. So we had to, it's like this chicken egg problem, right? When you can create artificially the light and the colors of those tubes. But also, we didn't use real tungsten light. It was all made up colors like cool fluorescent and the monitor light. There's like a balance that you have to be careful that something doesn't feel too stylized, because at the end of the day, our film is based on true events, and you want it to feel authentic. But at the end of the day, it's not a documentary, right? It is a thriller. It's a historic thriller, and it shows what happened. But to do it justice, to do this events, like to show how maybe people, what they went through, you have to make it thrilling, because that's what I think, what I heard from people watching it, or from my experience watching 9/11 happening. It's a wild feeling, right? And how do you put this on a screen? And I can always say, like Tim Fehlbaum is he's such a brilliant director, and like he's focused on very few specific things, and like, not, the movie can become really overwhelming. You try to do this and this and that, and like what I like about working with him, he's like, he wants to make it as authentic as possible, and as like nothing, like he would never settle for the, like, that in a production meeting sometimes we discuss a problem, how do we shoot this, how do we solve this, and then the most obvious idea it's thrown out, and everybody, oh yeah, that's how we do it. Like, he would never go for this. Like, we always try to find something that's unique to this project. Like, mentioning like the way we filmed it, we pretty much shot it like a oneer, like a Birdman that has no cuts, but right. Then we tighten it all up in editing. It was always planned that way, that we get these connecting pieces and then it's tightened up, so that you see somebody, throwing somebody the keys, and you whip pan with it, and it's tightened up, but you feel all these connecting pieces, and that's, I think, what hopefully makes it feel more real, and you're more immersed, because it doesn't have this constructed, that's, set up the wide shot, cut to the medium shot, turn around, let's move the furniture out of the way so the camera dolly fits there, and redress this part, and continuity. Like, we didn't do this. We built everything on a soundstage, but we never pulled a wall or something. Like, our department would ask, like, which wall should we make wild? And said, like, no, let's not do this. We literally talked about the Das Boot. Do you remember this German film, the submarine film? And it was actually shot on those same sound stages in Munich. And there's a studio tour, like, for tourists, and they still have the original set from Das Boot outside. So sometimes during lunch breaks, Tim and I, we would go there and just walk through the set when there was like no visitors, tourists going through. And every time I felt, when we shot the entire day in our control room, it felt so claustrophobic. And then I went during lunch break through the sport, and I felt, oh my God, this is claustrophobic. After this, good coming back in our luxurious set, like, unbelievable how they pulled that off. And I know Jost Kano, the cinematographer, is amazing. He's one of my mentors. He's retired now and lives in Munich. And what he pulled off running through the submarine set with his gyro stabilizer and the energy.
Right.
Like he did before his Steadicam. I think he built this gyro stabilizer on a handheld camera.
It's like the two balls, right? That just like spin. Yeah, I've seen that.
And then they choreographed with all the people. They also fabricated chaos, right? It's not, if you want to create the sensation of chaos, but without confusing the audience. You don't just want to confuse the audience, then you lose them, right? They're going to look at their phone and check the text messages. You have to create this high energy, but still keep the eyes focused on a certain part of the screen. And that's why, like, I think on our last talk, you're a magician, right? Like, what you do as a magician, you direct the audience. Nice.
Just decks of cards sitting around.
That's what you direct the attention of the viewer to a certain part of the frame, right? In real life performance or on a stage, it's also like a frame. And the same we do, I think, as cinematographers with lighting and composition and depth of field. We direct the attention to somewhere And sometimes it's the most interesting not to direct the attention to the most obvious place, right? Maybe it's not the best to have the eyes in focus and visible. Maybe you want a silhouette and just hear it. Like there's no clear rule, but I think that's what's so fascinating about the language of cinema and what we do as cinematographers, right? And to direct that the audience gets the information of what's important for the scene, but also make you feel like there's something to discover. There's a mystery behind it, right? Does this shot have a soul? And it's not just you're capturing a performance in bright light, right? We're not performance capturers.
Right.
That's all about building a cinematic world.
Well, I can tell you for sure, at least in my theater, 2 moments I remember the audience in, I guess, was one gasp. I can't remember where, but like the sound cut out basically, and there was like an audible gasp, and then laughter when the runner gets interviewed. And I was like, that's good. I'm glad we're all on the same page here.
Yeah, it's such a fun scene, right? When talking about right now about all the artistry of filmmaking, but then in September 5, there's the scene that really happened. These shots were fired in the middle of the night, and the crew was not in yet, and they knew they want to investigate and have to film something. So there was no cameraman yet, right? And there was this assistant, and Peter Sarsgaard's character, he's like, wait, there's no cameraman? Like, who are you? Like, he's just an assistant. And then he's asking him, like, can you hold a camera? Yeah. Do you know how to load film? Yeah. Okay, here's a cameraman. That's all that matters. You put the camera and film, document the event, right? That's sometimes like talking, maybe sometimes to producers, you feel like, is that what
that's your whole job?
Do? Yes, yeah. Not the good ones, obviously, right? Like you discuss in more detail, but or maybe that's what it really is about, and we're all just crazy and trying to do this.
Just up our own asses about it, yeah.
What about that?
Well, I've kept you a little over, and I know it's probably late where you are because the sun's down here now. So I'll let you go. But I absolutely fucking loved this movie, and it was very exciting to see your name pop up on it because I was like, it's my friend, you know. But it happens every once in a while, and I get excited.
Such a unique film. I'm so glad to be part of this, and so excited for Tim to see where his career is going, what films he's going to do next, and everyone involved. It was such a small, passionate project. We had no clue, right? We shot this like in a submarine. We had no idea that one day it gets a Golden Globe nomination, right, for Best Picture. Like unbelievable, and you cannot control it. There's no big studio behind it. When we made it, it was a small independent film, and it premiered in Venice in a side section. Like nobody wanted to what is this film, and then it got such great reviews, and like I think it made, especially for people working in the media, they really see themselves in this and appreciate the detail that went into it. So that was really instrumental that have really critics rooting for our film. And now I'm just glad that people get to see it. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, because it comes out. This podcast will come out after it comes out in the U.S., but it comes. Yeah. I guess came out in the U.S. on the 17th, right?
There's a limited release right now in New York, LA, and Toronto, and then on the 17th of January, there's the wide release.
Yeah, and then I'll pick it up on the Blu-ray too. Just make sure everyone gets an extra buck.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Great talking to you.
You too, man. Next time, when you come back to LA, let me know. We'll,
I'm in LA now, but I'm flying out tomorrow. I'm on a movie.
Same. Yeah. I leave at 6 a.m, so I have to do it on the way back.
Awesome. Yeah. I can't wait to catch up.
Awesome. Thanks, brother.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Frame and Reference is an Albot production, produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to frameandrefpod.com and clicking on the Patreon button. It's always appreciated, and as always, thanks for listening.